Welcome to Maner Moments, Business Insights for the Restaurant Industry. This is the first of a four-part series of informative 20 to 25-minute discussions. Today's topic is 5 ways data-driven decisions can transform your restaurant business. Let's get started. I want to start out and first do a couple of introductions, starting with myself. My name is James Meyer. I am a principal at Maner Costerisan. I'm actually a principal in our Business Solutions and Technology department, but we are a regional CPA firm based in Michigan. I've been consulting for over 30 years in the IT consulting area, and more specifically, my experience is really in helping growing multi-entity, multi-location businesses leverage technology and business application software to streamline accounting, budgeting, and reporting processes. With me today is Gregg Thomas, the principal member and founder of CFO Advisors. Gregg is an restaurant industry expert. Over the last 25 years, he's been the acting CFO of over 50 restaurant and retail companies across the United States, providing financial leadership and industry expertise to and serving as the CEO's trusted advisor. With those introductions, let's get started here. Let's start with our first point. Our focus today is on 5 ways data-driven decisions can transform your business. And that all starts around the data. There's a lot of data out there. People talk about big data. There's data everywhere. But the key is what data is the right data? What data is important for you? And what are the data sources? Where is your data coming from? Where do you get data? And what format is it that's useful to you? So if you've just got a bunch of data sitting in a report, is that going to be helpful to you, or would it be helpful if you had it in a tool that would allow you to be able to maybe see it more visually and maybe do a little bit of exception reporting, for example? And what about the context of the data? If your sales are down this week, it may be simply because maybe if you're in a college town, it's spring break and sales are down. So you're not worried about it. So it's not just having the data, it's also understanding how that data fits in the context. So Gregg, I'm curious, what are your thoughts on that as far as the data?
Thanks, James. Well, I think the first thing is that it has to be the right data, and it has to be actionable. Grabbing, collecting, assembling data that you really can't do anything with, either because it's not structured very well, or you don't have the people on your staff that can really interpret it or do anything with it, is a cause of concern. So it's really all about getting the right data out of the gate and data that you can impact the business on immediately.
Yeah, absolutely. So what other, when you talk about data and getting the data out of the gate, what type of data do you look for?
Well, primarily, particularly in this environment with sales and counts under pressure, the first one would be really understanding product mix, really understanding sales. So grabbing sales at the transaction level and being able to, if you're multi-unit, compare your stores and understand how PMIX differences between the stores are arising and what opportunities there might be to drive sales in a particular day part or a particular day of the week. So I would always start out with sales data, because that's where the biggest bang is going to happen. And it's also the fastest data that you can get your hands on. The other 2 big ones would be cost of sales, which is really product. So product usage is what you're after. How many pounds of proteins am I going through this week? And how does that compare across restaurants? Easy to get, hard to assemble sometimes. And then the third piece would be hourly labor and how many hours, how productive am I, what's happening to my wage rate, how can I counter it? All things that you may have an idea of what's happening, but the data may prove that what you think's happening is not really what's happening.
Right, absolutely. I think I'd like to add to that also is the other side of it is there's also the accounting aspect of just looking at your overall profitability, because you've got some additional expenses that are in there that are not part of your food, not part of your labor. And what are those? What is that profitability across your locations, your units, your whole operation? Okay, so that's number 1. That's data. You got to have the right data if you want to transform your business and make data-driven decisions. So let's talk about the second item. So it's not just data. In order to truly use that data, you need to automate it. So let's go to the next slide here. So automation is really key to being able to successfully use your data, because you can have the best data in the world, but if it's not timely, it's not going to do you any good, because data, if I don't get data to the end of the month, then it's not helping me make decisions during the month or on a week-by-week basis or even a day-by-day basis. So the information needs to be, and you mentioned this earlier, I think, Gregg, is it needs to be timely. It needs to be accurate. One of the challenges that's out there with a lot of organizations is they take their data and they can analyze it, but you end up having to do it in Excel. And by the time you do it in Excel, you're prone to potentially making errors, because people are manually entering and manipulating information, but also, again, it's not timely. Would you agree with that, Gregg?
Oh, I totally agree with that. I think that when I think of automating data, my mind goes to probably two areas that we see over and over with groups around this country. Number one is that if they are getting their data, they have someone on their staff that is, just as you described, they're inputting it into Excel, they're manipulating it in Excel, and that's an issue because of data problems, miskeying it, formulas that aren't correct, that kind of thing, as well as the timeliness of it. But I think the other big one is that you're trusting somebody that's really good at Excel to spot the trends and spot the opportunities. That person may not be the right person. They may not have the operating capabilities or skill sets. And so it's always a better idea to get information out in front of operators as quickly as possible in a very simple way, but that it absolutely expresses what's happening within the business.
Right. I agree 100% with that. And then in turn, what that does is make the information much more insightful, because they've got it right away. They've got that information right in front of them in a way that they can see it, and which means then again, it's actionable. And I think you mentioned this earlier too, is if you're going to use data to help you grow your business, then the data has to be timely and it has to be actionable so that I can actually act on it in a timely fashion and make a difference. Do you agree?
I totally agree. Yeah. And see what the change has been. Were you able to impact it? And see that quickly. It's not good enough to get financial statements 3 or 4 weeks after the end of the period. If you've been causing or having an issue or causing an issue within your labor or within sales or anything like that, you've been doing it for 8 weeks now and you're not going to know about it. So getting that information timely is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, you need to get the right data and we need to automate it. So that means you need to have systems in place that are going to make that automation possible, whether it's tools to allow you to integrate and pull and consolidate all your information from your POS and your back office systems, etc., or if it's just tools to present the data so automatically for you. But you need to automate. And then once you got the data and once you automate, the next piece here, if you want to really transform your business, is I need to think about how I'm going to use this data, which I think you kind of alluded to a few minutes ago, Gregg, when you were starting to talk about that. But some of the things I look at, or some of the things we see here, are things like trend monitoring, watching what's happening over time, whether that's over a week, over a month, over a year, or year to year, is monitoring those trends, which is really easy to do if you've got systems that allow you to graphically kind of see how that's happening. Right? But you also have the concept of exception reporting. What I want to know is I don't want to know everything. I just want to know where there's a potential problem. So it's great if you can have visualizations that it can show you when something doesn't look right and maybe highlighted in red so that it pops right out. And I can say, hey, I got to look at this. Maybe something isn't right here. Maybe all of a sudden my expenses took a leap, or my labor costs, there was a jump. And why is that? What's going on there? Or maybe one of my stores is all of a sudden out of line with what the budget or the other stores. Why is that? Right? So you want that exception reporting, and which kind of ties into the next thing I have there, the next bullet point, which is the comparatives. And there's lots of comparatives you can do, whether you're looking at, again, month to month, week to week, actual versus budget, if you've got budgets, or maybe comparing location. What are your thoughts on that, Gregg?
Well, I think comparisons are really, really important. It's really the only way to understand what's happening in the environment. And what we like to use as our base comparison is always either year over year, same day last year, same day this year, same week, simply because of seasonality. I mean, the restaurant industry has a lot of seasonality, and sure, you can compare week to week, but you'll get confused with the seasonality of it. So example of that would be the Easter shift. We have an Easter shift again this year, where last year Easter happened in one week, this year it's going to happen in a different week. And so it's going to throw off the comparison if you're not careful. But absolutely that, as well as having some key metrics that you really understand, that you've vetted. Two of them that come to mind for me would be obviously food costs, and knowing where your food costs theoretical should be, and are you hitting it. And the other one is productivity. And that can go as granular as, for instance, back of house hours against food sales. How productive are you being? But know what that productivity measure should be and how far off you are from it.
Right. Really good points. Really, really good points on food costs and productivity. You know, I kind of look too at the other one is, I think, is customer satisfaction and quality. I don't know if you've looked at measuring that much, but just, so it's not only just keeping how do we manage our costs, but are we still servicing the customers the way we want to service them, right?
Yeah, that's a great point, James. That is a key measure. If you can get the data to support it, and I'd say most groups don't have that data stream. If you are an Aloha customer, you would have access to it. They do have a guest satisfaction service as part of the Aloha point of sale if you subscribe to it. But it's hard to get, but if you get it, absolutely. You can then compare that and trend it against sales. Yep.
Okay. Our next point, which is the why. So why is this so important? Why do you want to be a data-driven business if you're trying to grow? Why is that data important when you're trying to grow? That's where I think, Gregg, this is really your area of expertise, or something you're passionate about. I don't know. Would you like to maybe discuss that and talk through that?
Sure. Well, I think that how you use the data, why you use the data, has everything to do with bottom line profitability at the store level. Ultimately, we want to hold managers accountable. And what are we holding them accountable to? It's usually bottom line profitability. It's awfully hard for a manager to, in the short term, control sales. I mean, obviously they can do it through service levels, et cetera, but you really want to hold them accountable to the bottom line. And you also want to be really accurate when you're building new stores to know how that store may perform and be pretty close on it. It affects a lot of things. So, I mean, that's what we typically see. So really holding managers accountable and knowing when they're going off, how to fix it. You can't do it without the data. And building new stores, being accurate on your pro forma so that the bank or whoever doesn't come back and say, you guys constantly underperform your forecast and your pro forma. Two biggest ways that we see it used.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really good point. And, you know, especially when you talk about that pro forma, especially if you're trying to open new stores, how important it is to budget and plan appropriately, and then measure against that or monitor against that and make sure that you're hitting, you know, those goals that you set and that budget that you set, right?
Correct.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the next thing, our fifth and final point here, which is the strategy of how do we get there? How do you become a data-driven business? And where do you start with that? Do you have, you know, is there a plan? How do you begin? What are the real roadblocks that are keeping you from growing, and where do you want to prioritize it on that? So from a priority standpoint, Gregg, what would you say? Where would you start?
Well, I think there's two paths to follow simultaneously. One is to get your data. It's not good enough to just have a point of sale system, particularly if you have multiple restaurants. It's too difficult to get the data out of a point of sale every day. So you want the right above store system in place that allows you to grab the data every morning automatically and pull it into a business intelligence tool such as Tableau or something like that. So while you're doing that, you'll also find that a lot of the data may not be accurate. You may have set up your database within your point of sale system incorrectly. And now maybe you've outgrown it. Maybe now you're doing a lot of third-party delivery, and that was never contemplated when the point of sale was set up, and you want to know more about it. So you need to get clean data and a clean structure. So that's part of it. And while you're doing that and grabbing the data streams, the other part is to make sure that your accounting system is up to speed and is quick. And that's where building some integrations, having a great system in place and building some integrations into the accounting system from the data really comes into play. And within 3 to 6 months, you'll find that, oh my gosh, I went from having nothing and not knowing where to start to having almost an overload of data. And now I really have to understand exactly what I need and when to look at it.
Yeah, very good points. I think the other thing, just to add to that a little bit on the accounting side, is it's really helpful to have a system where everything's in one database, where I can look at all of my entities and operations and have total visibility across the whole operation. I see a lot of restaurant groups, for example, that are running on QuickBooks, and they might have a different LLC for every location, but everyone's on a separate QuickBooks database. So it's almost impossible to see across those databases and see how our profitability is across the whole operation and how much we're really spending with any given vendor. It's important to have the right systems, right? So, and I think that's really where you're going with this.
Yeah, the hair goes on the back of my neck when we walk into situations where we have multiple units and QuickBooks is being used, because it was never intended to support multiple units. And you end up exactly as you just described, James, with financials that are very labor intensive to assemble. If you're trying to do consolidations, it's a question, it's an issue. And I can't get to my store comparisons quickly. Not to mention issues with chart of accounts and issues with the financial statement format. But yep, I agree totally.
Yep, exactly. Okay, well, thanks, Greg. That's great. I appreciate all your input on that. So let's summarize, what we covered today. We talked about the importance of having the right data and making sure that you have access to that data. We talked about the importance of automating that information so that you can make it available on a timely basis to the people that need it, so you can act on it. We talked about the different ways you might want to look at your metrics and analyze that data. We talked about why it's important, and then we talked about some strategies of how to get there. So that was really high level. It was brief, but I think that if you can do that, if you can look at those pieces, the bottom line is a lot of success for your operations. Thank you today for your time. We appreciate the opportunity to speak with you. Again, this is the first of 4 series that were informative sessions we're doing, so we hope you'll join us for future sessions. If you've got questions, my contact information is there, and feel free at any time to follow up with me, and if needed, I can bring Greg in, and we'd be happy to answer your questions on any of this. Appreciate you attending, and hopefully you'll join us on our next session. Have a nice day.